What is going on, my fellow Guardians? My name is Alpha Skies. Today we're going to be covering a video on what I believe to be the current best scout rifles for more pinnacle-based content, or more specifically, the Grandmaster Nightfalls. As most of you know, the primary player base that I want to help out when it comes to Destiny 2 is going to be more of the solo players, or the players that are in small groups. The first tier list that I'm actually going to be showing you is going to be showing what scout rifles are going to be the absolute easiest to farm as a solo player, and obviously going down to the worst. And then after that one, if you guys want to pause and take a look at that one, you can. I'm going to show another tier list, and this is going to be the scout rifles that I feel are the most effective in the current state of the game. Now, do keep in mind these lists are very much subject to change, as the meta of D2 tends to shift quite frequently as we go season through season, so these are just what I feel are going to be the most effective scout rifles, especially in the current season. But with the tier list aside, let's go ahead and start discussing what scout rifles I feel like you guys should be farming now, as obviously when seasons go on, the loot pools tend to switch out, so you want to make sure that you're getting a lot of these drops and getting these weapons before they rotate out of the pool, because if they do end up going away, who actually knows when they're going to come back? I'll go ahead and briefly go over the names of the scout rifles and the current known methods to actually obtain them. And with that being the case, we'll go ahead and start off with the scout rifle that is the scout rifle for this season, being the Tears of Contrition. So you can obviously get this scout rifle from doing the seasonal content currently, which is the Nightmare, Containment, and the Sever activities. You can also take Umbral engrams and go to the Helm over to the Crown of Sorrow, and you can focus those engrams into a Tears of Contrition as well. This is a very easy to farm scout rifle and a very good one to actually pick up because it does have a weapon schematic that you can get to actually craft the weapon, so I highly recommend you get this one while we have a very easy way of farming it. Next is Staccato. I would highly recommend anytime you see these, if you're completely unaware of whether it's a god roll or not, it doesn't really matter, hang on to it because this is a world drop weapon currently. We don't have any specific way to pick this up, so again, if you do find these, keep up with it. Next is going to be one of my personal favorites, which is the Nightwatch Scout Rifle. It is a kinetic. You can get it from having a new character actually go and complete some of the quests, and you'll get it from Shahan, or if it is in the rotation for the Dares of Eternity, you can go grind Dares of Eternity to get it. Another one is the Servant Leader Scout Rifle, which drops from Gambit, or you can get some of those engrams from actually getting the Gambit reputation up, and you can focus it at the vendor himself. And last but certainly not least is Vouchsafe. It is one of my favorite scout rifles right now. There are a couple of ways of actually going about doing this. You can go do Blind Well, as you are guaranteed a weapon drop at the chest at the end of Blind Well. You can also focus your Umbral engrams over at the Helm table to actually get any weapon from the Dreaming City pool, so you have a chance to get it there, and then you can also get it to drop from the Shattered Throne dungeon. Although those are some of my recommendations, let's go ahead and talk about the scout rifles that I believe are absolutely essential to pick up right now. One thing that I think is extremely important to note is that scout rifle mods for this season is currently Unstoppable Scout, meaning that we are able to keep our kinetic slot open for anti-barrier with the Aura Blast. So obviously with that being the case, I think the actual elemental scout rifles are the most important to have this season, and they are the absolute essentials to have right now. All three of which being scouts that we've actually already discussed how to farm this season. Those scout rifles being the Staccato, the Vouchsafe, and the Servant Leader. Let's go ahead and start off with the Servant Leader, the kinetic scout that you get from Gambit. And I know that I had just said that I actually preferred elemental scout rifles to be the absolute best scout rifles to use right now, and amazingly enough, even though this is in the kinetic slot, it is no exception. And what I mean by that is that Servant Leader is able to roll a perk in its fourth perk slot known as Osmosis, and what this does is when you throw a grenade, your weapon will actually do elemental damage matching the grenade of the subclass that you currently have equipped. This means that this is one of the most flexible scout rifles in the entire game. No matter what burn a Nightfall has, as long as you coordinate your subclass to that burn or whatever the shields are for the enemies in there that you need to take down, all you have to do is throw a grenade and you can actually just start breaking those shields like no one's business. The only downside to running this scout in the current season is that you either have to coordinate with your team to run an Aura Blast to break anti-barrier, or you are going to have to use the scout rifle with a pulse as well. You can get Osmosis in the fourth slot, which I do absolutely think is the god roll, and looking over at the third slot, there are two perks that I think are worth rolling, that being Surplus or Rapid Hit. These can both be argued to be the best in slot perk for the third slot, and that's going to be the exact same scenario when it comes to Vouchsafe. And now before we get into any more depths with this guide, let's go ahead and start taking a look at these two perks and figuring out which one is going to be better for you. Starting off with my personal preference, Rapid Hit. You gain one Rapid Hit stack per precision hit, which which grants you reload speed and stability for the next 2 seconds. This does stack up to 5 stacks, and the reason that I like this opposed to Surplus is purely that you can get your reload speed stacks up simply by hitting precision hits. But now let's move over to Surplus. With Surplus, you are granted increased handling, reload speed, and stability for each fully charged ability. Those 3 abilities being your melee, your grenade, and your class ability. There are several actual benefits to Surplus, the first and most major one being that you're going to get handling as well as stability and reload speed, but the fact that this perk is actually going to work with exotics that grant you double abilities. For example, Omnioculus giving you the double on the smoke grenades, or the Armamentarium giving you double grenades. This just creates a little bit of flexibility for you, and if you have played a lot of Grandmasters in the past, then you're fully aware that you're not always going to be using your abilities, and those just give you a little bit more wiggle room to work with. But now let's go ahead and transition over into looking at the Vouchsafe. This is a Void Energy Scout Rifle, which again, I believe the god roll to be Rapid Hit Explosive Payload. The main reason for putting this scout rifle up here is primarily just because this scout is extremely consistent. Again, you can argue a couple different roles on it, like having Surplus on it, or even 4th times the charm. But you're always going to find that explosive payload is extremely good to use on these scout rifles because of the fact that you essentially get very little to no damage drop off using this perk whatsoever. So if you take a look at Vouchsafe's actual stats, you find that it's a little lackluster in both the range and the stability department. But literally both of those flaws are immediately saved by the fact that you can roll Rapid Hit and Explosive Payload. Rapid Hit granting you stability with precision hits, and then Explosive Payload obviously reducing the damage drop off significantly. Let's go ahead and move on to what I think is the absolute underdog of this season, which is the Staccato. This scout rifle is an absolute damage dump. You can roll triple tap with Focus Fury. You're going to see that a lot of players are actually going to be pushing towards Incandescence. However, for in-game activities, I don't think Incandescence is actually a very good perk to pick up. However, with triple tap Focus Fury, all you have to do is actually deal 50% of the magazine size as precision hits, and then you're just going to get a flat 20% increased damage buff for 11 seconds on the weapon. You have triple tap, making this one of the most ammo efficient guns in the game, as to where you don't have to reload hardly at all, and you're rewarded with a couple of headshots by getting a good 20% damage buff for a fairly lengthy amount of time, which is going to help you clear out a lot of the trash or yellow bar ads inside of Grandmasters in general. You can roll explosive payload on this scout rifle, however I have found that you honestly do not need it, as this rifle has a fairly decent bit of range already. The only downside to this scout is just the fact that you can't actually have a guaranteed way of farming it right now. You can only get it from the world weapon pool, which kind of stinks. There are 2 quick honorable mentions that I want to go ahead and briefly cover, the first one being the Aisha's Embrace from the Trials of Osiris. This scout is a Void Scout Rifle, which is extremely strong, as it's going to have the same role as the Staccato with the triple tap with Focused Fury. The only reason I have it as a personal preference as opposed to the Staccato is just obviously my personal preference. The only reason I would take the Staccato or the Vouchsafe over the scout is purely that I feel like the range isn't quite as good on this weapon, and I'm just not a huge fan of the 260 RPM frame. Next of which is a good old fan favorite, being the Vision of Confluence from the Vault of Glass raid. Farming this scout rifle isn't the worst thing in the world, as you do get it from the Vault of Glass raid. The big pain of this scout rifle comes from the fact that you have to find 6-man groups that are actually willing to consistently farm the encounters that it drops from. And if you want to go for a time lost, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, you're going to have to find 6-man stacks, but you're going to find even less because the light requirement for it is 1590. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the actual rolls you can get on this weapon, because the rolls you can get on this scout are actually really nice. Just like some of the scout rifles prior, this one can roll Surplus, but I think this scout is going to be very popular in the future as we see scout rifle anti-barriers inevitably come back, as it can roll Disruption Break. With Disruption Break, after you break an elemental shield or a barrier on a champion, you're actually going to increase the kinetic damage that you do by 50% by 5.5 seconds. Pairing that with a kinetic sniper rifle like the Succession or the Thoughtless is going to make this a very powerful scout to use. Unfortunately, you're only going to see that being useful again whenever anti-barrier scout is out. But if you want to run that scout, have no fear, as it also rolls with Frenzy. Having Frenzy means that after 12 seconds of being in combat, you're going to get a fairly decent amount of buffs to your weapon for a period of time. Those buffs being that you're going to get a 15% increase to your damage, 50 bonus handling, and 50 reload speed as well. And the reason I like this perk so much is that in Grandmasters, you're going to find a lot of the bigger choke point areas where you're going to be fighting large waves of enemies or being in rooms that have lots of enemies, and so you're going to have the uptime on this perk pretty much the entire time, with the only real drawbacks to this scout rifle being that it is a 180 RPM, which I'm not a huge fan of the slower RPMs of it, and that it's just honestly a pain in the butt to farm out a good one. But now that we've got that out of the way, I wish you guys the absolute best of luck in grinding any of these scout rifles out. And if you enjoy this type of content, go ahead and leave a like and hit that subscribe button, and also hit the notification bell so you know when my videos are going live. And most importantly, I hope you guys have some easy farms with the Grandmaster Nightfalls, and I will catch you guys in the next video.